The Legend of Zelda is my favorite video game franchise of all time. And today, the franchise turns 34 years old when The Legend of Zelda originally released back in Japan in 1986. I don't have to tell you the impact the series has had not only on video games, but people as well. I first played The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time when I was 10 years old, and it was really what brought me into becoming a gamer. And as a result, I loved The Legend of Zelda, and still do. It is my favorite video game franchise, and I love all of the games to death. But I thought it would be fun to look back 34 years ago to the day to when the original Legend of Zelda released. Let's see if it holds up in 2020. The Legend of Zelda first released in Japan in 1986 for the Famicom Disk System, and then later in North America in 1987 for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Immediately when booting up the game, you begin to realize this ain't your grandma's NES game. Well, considering how long it's been, it probably is. Most NES games at the time were more simple in story due to limited hardware, and had you traveling in such a limited space, more often than not being reduced simply to left or right. Little known, not very popular title, not sure if you've ever heard of it or not, but it's called Super Mario Bros. Was a simplistic, linear platformer that had you traveling forward through every stage. Shigeru Miyamoto, creator of both The Legend of Zelda and Super Mario Bros., wanted the game to be polar opposites of one another. The Legend of Zelda would be more open for player exploration, with the player decision in mind. You could go any direction you chose as the player. Up, down, left, right. Okay, 4. You could go in 4 directions. Are you happy now? Still, though, this was drastic. For the time, nothing had been done like this, especially not to the scale of freedom. As a result, this one singular title helped pave the way, being the most iconic title to ever exist for open-world games. Past, present, or future. Of course, we're here to talk about the game itself, just not the history behind it. I mean, with me talking about something I love, especially the development process of video games, we'd be here all day. Oh god, covering Earthbound is gonna be a fucking nightmare. Legend of Zelda, though, has a fairly basic story in terms of what we expect today, but in this case, it works quite well. We find ourselves in the mystical kingdom of Hyrule, where an evil demon monster by the name of Ganon? Ganonan? Oh, okay, Ganon. Ganon has obtained a relic of godlike power known as the Triforce of Power. Fearing that Ganon would obtain its counterpart, the Triforce of Wisdom, the princess of the, beautiful land of Hyrule, tore the Triforce into 8 shards and scattered them in dungeons across the land before being kidnapped. Our hero, Link, must find all 8 shards so that he must kill Ganon and stop him from obtaining both pieces of the Triforce and plunging the world into darkness. Fairly simple, yes, but that's really all we need to know before getting started. You learn of the game's story by either looking in the instruction manual, which, I mean, nobody has today, or by waiting for a few brief seconds on the title screen. As mentioned before, due to limited hardware, games couldn't really have fully fleshed out storylines, at least to the desired extent. So we learn all this information just from a few instances of text on the title screen. Once we start up the game, though, we are instantly thrown into the game. No text, no sense of direction, just 100% exploration. I just want to point out, first things first, how genius of a start this is. Let's take a second here to really analyze this first panel. You can tell by the extremely detailed map that we are vaguely somewhere in the middle of the map. This is a very smart design choice because if the player were to start closer to one side or the other, natural instinct would insist they cover more ground by heading in the opposite direction. If a player were to start in the left-hand corner, for example, naturally they would insist on moving towards the right, and by starting downward, the majority would insist on moving forward, and so on and so forth. By starting in the middle, though, and having main directions V available, it leaves us to choose any path. Left, up, or right, without feeling obligated to choose one route over the other. I also have to note that the cave on this first panel is present to the player. The player could have easily just started off with the sword in hand, and realistically the outcome would have been exactly the same. The fact that Link doesn't start with his sword tells us that even having a weapon at all is the choice of the player. Hell, players have even reached the point of completing the second quest without the sword entirely. It's difficult, but possible. The player sees the cave and is rewarded for making the option to enter, and as a result, combat gets much easier. Even though it was right in front of us, the player is rewarded for choosing to enter the cave, thus encouraging the player to enter more caves and explore other territories. Knowing that they will be rewarded, and not knowing exactly what you'll find or how it will help you, just adds to the enjoyment, mystery, and thrill of exploration. Exploration works on an effort to reward system. If exploring is satisfying and rewards the player for their actions, it will lead to them continuing to want to explore without ever having exploration be boring, and the reward must be worth the task of exploration to come off as satisfying. This is easily the original Zelda's ideal concept and its greatest strength. Unfortunately, this is where a lot of the first game's strong points reach an end. As I've stated before, there is no sense of direction in any sort of way. There is one example I enjoy, however, and it's extremely common in open-world RPGs and in older adventure games like this. The game starts off with the most simple of Zelda enemies, Octoroks. Very easy to defeat in these early 2D Zelda games. We're going to cover how to combat in this game very shortly, but for now let's focus on how to actually progress first. Something I feel is missing from a bunch of open-world games is pacing, and this is something this game actually does quite well. What I'm trying to say is, how do you point the player in the right direction without holding their hand or using a direct arrow that says, go here? The answer is quite a nice result. As I mentioned, the game starts off with a very simple enemy to defeat. Our first stage sword is enough to take them down in just a hit, and our small little baby shield is enough to deflect their rocks. We take only half a heart of damage from them, meaning we can take up to 6 hits before failing. It's enough to show us how to play the game, but not too much to where we feel powerless. However, one wrong move will show us that can change, and fast. One wrong move and you enter a later territory. The enemies and difficulty increase rapidly. This is a clear red flag that shows us that we aren't supposed to be here. Of course, The Legend of Zelda works on a reward system. You can enter these areas at any time, and if the player feels they're skilled enough to stay alive in these areas, the reward they will receive for exploring these more dangerous areas will be greater, and in turn, this makes the game much easier. This is a fantastic way to encourage player exploration, lead them onto the correct path, and maintain a reasonable share of difficulty that seems to be consistent. This sounds perfect, but of course this is only on paper. Whether or not The Legend of Zelda succeeds in executing this idea properly is up for debate. I'm going to touch on this more when we get into combat, but I think we should focus on the best prize for exploration, the dungeons. Zelda dungeons have become more of a staple than anything else, and are an essential part of every single Zelda game, actually. For the most part, and especially in 3D Zelda games, the dungeons are used for pacing and to move along the plot in an organized and constructed way, either a reward for more progress in the game, along with the satisfaction of more complex puzzles over time. However, dungeons in later Zelda games are more of a way to organize plot points. Basically, completing point A will open the gate for point B. In some cases, completing a dungeon will also open a wider note of side quests. The overall reward is more story and more quests for the player. The Legend of Zelda, however, has a better and yet also worse way of organizing and rewarding dungeons. Dungeons in Zelda 1 have no specific order in which they can be found or even beaten. Realistically, the number exists to measure difficulty, length, and order in which you're most likely to find them. Of course, the difficulty increase is rapid, so you are more likely to change the first 2 dungeon orders, or maybe even the third if you feel you're veteran enough. As you obtain more hearts, items, and relics to help you on your quest, playing dungeons out of order becomes more possible and can actually be quite fun. I didn't do this, of course, but it's nice to know that the game will allow the player to choose which dungeon they would want to play first as a reward for playing well, essentially saying, if you can do it, go for it. However, playing the dungeons in any order doesn't really benefit you too much, except getting an item early in dungeons, and an item that'll let you get a heart much faster. For example, you need to get the raft from level 3 to be able to even get to level 4, and the flute from level 5 to even enter level 7. Of course, you could skip level 6 entirely, which is something I would recommend doing, so that way you have more hearts when fighting Wizrobes, which can be kind of annoying. There's a bit of strategy to which dungeons need to be completed in what order, which again is great, but if you're playing this game for the first time, it can actually be kind of frustrating. You could spend days searching on where to go next because in every single dungeon, you don't have to go anywhere near the item locations, and you could skip right past them. Of course, if you were able to get the dungeon map, you could try exploring all the rooms, and then eventually you'll notice a pattern where each dungeon has a dungeon item. But it could still take you days to figure this out. No walkthrough, no strategy guide, just based on what you know, especially as a child. This can be extremely difficult to find out. The worst part of it is going back into dungeons. Not only do you have the entire overworld to explore, but also dungeons as well. If you're missing 3 items and have been trying to make progress in several different dungeons at the same time, it can be confusing which one actually holds the key to progress. Even if you find something that should be used to make progress, unless you already know this is the item you need, which is extremely unlikely, it can be unclear as to what specific item you need to use, or even where to use it. If you even have the correct item. I know what you might be thinking. Well, Shine Sprite Ditto, surely an NES game has a hint system. After all, there are hint caves and hint rooms, so clearly one of these will be able to help you. To that I say, my dear viewer, you are absolutely correct. Let's take a look at some of these hints, if you will. Master using it, and you can have this. Okay, how am I supposed to master it if you don't let me have it? Eastmost Peninsula is the secret. Okay, thanks, but as a, 9, 10-year-old kid, what the fuck is a peninsula? And where the hell is Eastmost? Okay, one more. This one has to be useful. Let's see here. Go to next room. Go to the next room? Really? That's how I make progress. I thought standing still or moving backwards would be the way to go. Thank you, game. I was lost. Of course, I'm being a little bit overly critical here. There are a few helpful hints, like this one that tells you to shoot into the eyes of Goma. It doesn't really make sense at first, like, what the hell is a Goma? Then you realize, however, that you only really have one item that shoots anything, and that's the bow and arrow. So you kind of piece together the item you're supposed to use, and the Goma part starts to make sense when you reach the end of the dungeon. It's a really good note that the hint is in this dungeon and not earlier, because then it wouldn't coordinate as well, and this remains fresh in your mind, and you reach the boss room and notice the eye changes sprites. It all starts to make sense. Very nice. I was going to bring up the hint that says walk into the waterfall and complain that the game is so vague here, and that you could spend hours looking for which waterfall it's referring to. But there's actually only like 2 or 3 waterfalls, and you literally just walk into it for the reward. It doesn't really take long to find out, and it's kind of simple. So I'll give this a pass as a useful hint. However, the hints I claimed as useful and cryptic aren't necessarily wrong statements. They can make sense eventually, but let me go ahead and explain what each of those meant. Eastmost Peninsula is the secret. Again, how the fuck is a child supposed to know what a peninsula is? I remember having peninsula as a word in 6th grade, and when it was defined as a piece of land almost surrounded by water or projecting out into a body of water, I was like, oh hey, that's the secret from Zelda, it makes so much sense now, I get it, I know what to do. But let's say I was actually a smart child, and that if you don't know what that word meant or what it was, you looked it up and saw that in the dictionary. My mind would go, oh, okay, so basically there's going to be a secret at the cave of a body of water and on the east side. Oh, no. I figured at first that this was referring to maybe the entrance of level 4. It's on the east side of the screen and it's surrounded by water, and I thought maybe this is what it could be referring to. If not, look at how many other water locations there are on the map. This is so difficult to translate. What the game is actually referring to is this cave right here, the east corner of the map. It's not even in the water, but there is water on the east side of the screen surrounding the location, thus making it a peninsula. Yeah, it makes sense, but I feel this isn't a location that would immediately go to you when hearing the words presented, and that makes more sense after you find it, which is like the complete opposite of a hint, but you know, okay. The master using it, and you can have this hint, refers to 2 different locations in which the player obtains a stronger sword. In my mind, it would have to do with either enemies killed or something of that sort, where it involves the progress of you using the sword. However, the game refers to how many hearts you currently have total. For the white sword, you only need 5 heart containers at max, and for the magical sword, you really only need 12 heart containers before obtaining it. I'm not even saying this is a bad way to handle this, I really like this. It creates a chain of where exploring dungeons, or for hearts, offers the player a reward to not only travel in more dangerous areas, but also play better and make dungeons easier. I love this concept, just the word choice and phrasing doesn't really really relate to how many hearts you have at all, and it can be confusing or misleading on what the game could mean by this. The go to the next room hint is just fucking stupid. It's referring to the wall in this room, requiring you to bomb it to move on to the next room. This would be a really good way to tell the player about dungeon walls being bombable, but this has been required several times up until here to actually reach this point, so the player is already fully aware of what to do and of this mechanic's existence. It just seems like a waste of a hint space to me. Of course, I can't move on to the next bit without referring to the most infamous and frustrating hint of all. I didn't actually see this hint in my run through this time, but a hint exists saying Pulse Voice dislikes sound. And I personally hate this hint. Pulse Voice are these buddy-like enemies that hop around the screen. I remember specifically playing this game for the first time and trying to use the whistle over and over and over and over again as the only item that detects noise, but it never worked. But why? The hint told me they disliked sound. A similar hint exists in the game that tells you that in order to beat the boss, they hate a certain type of sound. And that's referring to the whistle, so why is it not working here? Oh, let me tell you a little bit of Legend of Zelda trivia, my friend! So in the Famicom version of the game, which, as mentioned before, is the Japanese release, Pulse Voice are defeated by making a loud sound into the second player's controller microphone on the Famicom. However, no such quality exists on the NES, so this was removed, which makes sense. So how do you defeat Pulse Voice in the American US version of the game? You shoot him with arrows. Yep! I don't know why, but you would think the best solution would be to keep the same effect but with the flute being played, but nope! They couldn't even fix the line to be something like Pulse Voice dislikes sharp edges to, I don't know, actually help the player. It wasn't in this run, but it was something worth noting. My first run of the game was stuck in utter confusion, just wondering why my flute was not working. I remember actually thinking that the game had glitched, and I restarted from my last save point, which was an entire dungeon before here. As like an 11-year-old, I was frustrated, and keep in mind I was playing this without a guide or anything to help me, but the game itself. I was also playing on an NES cartridge, and the game clearly here is giving you 100% false information. Luckily, it was possible to move on without defeating them, but still, it would be a mystery to me for quite some time. That, to me, is just bad game design on Nintendo of America's part. I'm pretty sure if I was Japanese, the translations or anything like that wouldn't be an issue, especially this one. Unfortunately, this is just an example of how poorly The Legend of Zelda has aged on the NES. If you think for 1 second, however, that the cryptic hints or mistranslations are the most frustrating aspects of the game, you are absolutely wrong. The combat in this game is easily the most frustrating, unfair, and dated aspect of this game. I do want to point out here that the game was a little more difficult for me. I'm playing the Nintendo GameCube Legend of Zelda Collector's Disc version of the game in order to be able to record, which is easily the worst version and worst way to play the game. The game itself is pretty much the same, but a few translations have been fixed, the flashes for death have been toned down just a wee bit, and of course the game is being played with a Nintendo GameCube controller. This is what made the run frustrating for me. The NES has a D-pad with 4 movable directions, and honestly, it controls and transitions smoothly into each movement. However, the GameCube controller has an 8-sided directional control stick set up for movement in any direction on a 3D plane. There is a 4-sided D-pad as well, but the movement is much more stiff and awkward for your hands. I would switch back and forth on which one I would actually move with, but I can't really say that one was better than the other. I for sure recommend playing this game on any other re-release, or the best way to play on the NES original. I died a lot more just because my movements weren't the direction I wanted them to be, or the controller just wouldn't have me move at all. So, it isn't solely the controller, however. Regardless of which release you're playing, a few things will always remain true. Link can only ever attack in 4 directions, just like his movement. This makes combat very limiting, regardless of what item. You press the button and wait for Link to attack. Whenever he does, he just kind of thrusts it forward. And whenever he does, regardless of which direction your shield is facing, Link will take damage. His animation to attack will always leave him vulnerable. Enemies move and attack fast and are constantly moving, even when you attack. If you miss your attack, you are going to take a hit, especially if there is more than one enemy on screen. It doesn't help that in addition to having to be completely vulnerable when attacking and waiting for the animation to stop, it also doesn't attack for every second the sword is present on screen. What I mean by that is if the sword animation has reached its peak and you are waiting for the animation to stop after attacking and waiting to attack again, and the enemy runs into it at any point in time, the enemy does not take damage. This can be really difficult. You not only have to fix your attack style so that you are prepared for the input delay, vulnerability, and the animation to stop, but also so that you hit the enemy right on the peak of the attack animation. Yeah, if you play long enough, you'll eventually get used to it and it will start to feel like normal combat, but that's not the point. You should not have to work to make yourself learn how to play a broken game so that it works properly. You shouldn't have to work around glitches or bad mechanics in order to play smoothly or enjoy combat. This still wouldn't be that bad if the enemies at least followed a specific rhythm or pattern in order to be defeated. In every Zelda game after this, you were able to successfully land, dodge, or block attacks based on picking up an enemy's attack or defensive habits or patterns. This makes combat feel more satisfying, especially when you die. Death would then feel like it's a result of bad playing. Misjudging an attack pattern or attacking too early is a fault of the player. Well, this is true in some cases, such as Octorok's Malvin's Pulse Voice, or even Keese following an attack pattern, tempo, or just a sheer pattern of movement. That is consistent and will allow you to retaliate easier. There are a lot of circumstances, such as Wizrobes, Likes, Dodongos, and of course, Darknuts. Darknuts are the worst Zelda enemies. On top of that, Darknuts will always have a sword in front of them, and if you try to approach them from the front, you will take damage, and lots of it. You will be required to fight them constantly in order to move on, sometimes back-to-back rooms, and there isn't just one. No. There will be 6, 7, hell, maybe even 8 all at once. This doesn't sound too bad, but they, like many other late-game enemies, do not follow such a pattern. Their movements are completely random and unpredictable, and there is absolutely no way to tell which direction they will face or move in just a single step. When you can only attack from the side, this is absolutely miserable. You will more than likely die more than once just from sheer bullshit. Too many Darknuts were facing the same direction and you literally couldn't move out of the way of taking damage. Or that you missed an attack and because of the delay, they were able to move quickly and you took a bunch of damage. This is easily the most annoying part of the game. It's unfair and makes you miserable. 90% of the deaths you will receive don't ever feel like it's the player's fault or that you don't have to learn anything from it. A large portion of deaths in video games are supposed to teach you something. Maybe my time was off, or maybe I need to approach this situation differently, or something of the sort. But nope! You can only ever approach the situation the exact same way each time and hope that the game's movements are just going to go more likely in your favor each attempt. This is the literal definition of insanity. I know, this sounds miserable, but I haven't even gotten to the worst part of this type of experience. Each time you die, at least in a dungeon, you will always return to the start of it, and only with 3 hearts. This is true for later games as well, but each game has a much different inventory and easier way of learning or recovering damage. Specifically the empty bottle. However, in this game, you can only buy a potion. A blue potion will heal you fully once, and a red potion will heal you twice. This is a really good item, but you have to pay each time you want to use it. You also have to return to one of the several old woman locations each time you need to get some. This doesn't seem too unfair, but also when you die or go a few rooms away, depending on the location, enemies will respawn fully. This includes Darknuts. So whenever you finally get down to one enemy, or move past a full room of enemies, you will then die, have no such potion left, and only 3 hearts when you return. You were expected to make it just as far, if not further, with only 3 hearts? With the enemy respawns? There's absolutely no way. If I could make it just as far with a full set of hearts and 2 full recovery and still fail, what on earth makes you think I will make it just as far with 3 hearts? It seems later dungeons follow this same aspects. For the later portions of the game, I would heal at a fairy fountain completely before entering the next location, and then I would go spend 68 rupees. 68! For the red potion each time I wanted it. so I could recover twice before finally dying. I'd make it a bit far each time, somewhere close to midway through to almost done to the dungeon, hell, sometimes even right at the boss. Each time, however, I found myself leaving the dungeon immediately after death, going back to the fairy fountain, and then yet again to the old woman to pay 68 rupees. This was a cycle that repeated so frequently that easily 1/4 of my total playtime and rupees spent was just repeating the cycle to get back to where I was before, or in some cases, just a few rooms ahead of where I had been. It was frustrating, a waste of time and money, and it was most likely spent at the fault of the game itself. It wasn't even me being penalized for my own actions, it was just the game being designed badly. And I used to really hate wizards, but it really dawned on me, in the process, who the true enemy was. That, of course, is Bubbles! These little cunts would hit you, knock you back too fucking far, and then make it so that you couldn't use your sword. And the length for this penalization for not being able to use your sword is far too long, especially towards the end of the game. They'll throw some of these asshats in a room with enemies that will steal your shield or deal massive damage with unpredictable attack patterns, and even launch you right into them. They're the worst part of the game, and easily the main cause of my failures in this entire playthrough. Towards the end of the game, and even really from the beginning, dungeons are just kinda boring. If you've been through one, you've been through them all, really. They all look the same, sound the same, and feel exactly the same. I hate being in these dungeons. A lot of the puzzles consist of blowing up a wall you didn't know existed, killing all the enemies in a room, or pushing a block slightly out of place. Each room looks the same and will repeat enemies, concepts, design, music, bosses, and sometimes even colors or layout, over and over and over. The dungeons simply aren't fun at all. I dread entering each and every one. I just want to push myself through them just so I can explore more. You eventually reach a point after like level 5 or 6 where you really can't get anything and there's nowhere else to go but the next dungeon, and it will be rapid. Level 6, level 7, level 8, and then finally level 9. This really kills my incentive to complete these dungeons. I know I can't really explore anymore, and if I do uncover secrets, it's just rupees, so I'm prepared for the next fucking time I die and have to repeat the cycle of Fairy Fountain and Potion. I really only push myself through them so I could get the heart container so I can last a little bit longer in the next dungeon with more enemies. Even outside the dungeon, you are stuck hearing the same song over and over and over. You only ever really hear the dungeon theme or the overworld theme until you eventually reach level 9, which has its own shitty song. That's really it. Yeah, the main Zelda theme is a classic and it's really, really good, but in a game where you are not only limited to 8-bit sound, but can easily get stuck wandering around for hours upon hours on end, it gets really repetitive and annoying, and it doesn't take long to reach there either. I'm almost done describing all this negativity, but there are really just many things that bothered me this time. I meant to mention this earlier, but I for some reason just couldn't slide into what I was saying. But level 7 is a really, really nice dungeon. It's a lot easier than level 6 or level 8, so it's nice to really take a step back. But then there's this asshole. Grumble, grumble. Yeah. You know, I see a douche like this and think, well, he's angry, so he's not gonna let me pass, so I have to attack him. He even flashes! So maybe you think you're doing damage, but guess what? You're not. There is absolutely no hint, no indication of what you need to do here. If you figure this out on your own, kudos to you. You probably work side by side with, I don't know, Stephen Hawking. Or Jesus. So how are you supposed to solve this puzzle? If you've been in a few of the shops throughout Hyrule, you may have seen this meat that you can purchase. It doesn't seem like much, and it doesn't even do anything. Well, yeah. Yup, you're supposed to give it to him, and then he just dies, I guess? But seriously, how the hell are you supposed to figure this out? Nothing even tells you this. What's worse is, this isn't even at the start of the dungeon, it's just a few rooms before the boss. Logically, it would make sense that you're supposed to use some dungeon item to be able to pass, which, if you're wondering, is just an optional item, which is a candle that lets you use it more than once per screen. Very useful in my opinion, but I don't know. Maybe this dude is tense and just needs some sensies, I don't know. Instead, you have to use an item that is never mentioned, never hinted at, and appears outside the dungeon after making it this far. If you didn't know this or didn't come prepared, you have to completely leave and make your way all the way back here. This dude doesn't even say, "I'm hungry," or "I can't afford food." He doesn't even say anything close to food. What the fuck? One thing I can say that this game does over later Zelda games is its use of items. I'm not sure what it is, but later Zelda games just tend to not use their full arsenal. This is especially true with 3D Zelda games. Even with rupees, they only last maybe once or twice that you actually use them. Uncovering them in later Zelda games just feels useless and pointless and very unrewarding. Here though, I will say you need a large amount of rupees through the entire game, and trust me, they aren't as frequent as you would like. Finding rupees is a satisfying reward because you'll always need them. Even if there aren't a whole lot of items to obtain in this game, each one of them gets used for more than once. Never really do any of them get abandoned, and they're used extremely frequently throughout the moment you get it until the moment you stop playing. I was honestly shocked at how much I was using the candle to not only progress in dungeons, but uncover dungeons and even secrets such as heart containers or even rupees. I loved this item so much, and I really wish later Zelda games would make use of all their items like this. It's so nice to see, and they really could borrow it from here. After we have conquered all 8 dungeons and obtained every piece of the Triforce, however, it is time to enter Spectacle Rock and conquer Ganon's lair, and save the Kingdom of Hyrule once and for all. I wish there was more to say here, honestly. I just can't find much to talk about. Even this doesn't really differ too much from every other dungeon. I can say that you better come in prepared. There are 2 dungeon items here. The Red Ring, which isn't required, but damn is it useful! Level 3 defense helps a lot in maneuvering through here. The other is the Silver Arrow, which is actually necessary to land the final blow on Ganon. Much like the rest of the game, you could really just wander around for hours, or even end up at the final boss thinking you're done, but not knowing you needed the Silver Arrow. I find this to be less unlikely, though, since it's never really happened to me. It doesn't stray too far from the main path, and it really isn't too far from the final boss room, so I'll give it a pass. I will say, however, that the final dungeon is surprisingly easy. It isn't too tedious or annoying to maneuver through, and honestly, the game really doesn't seem too difficult here. It's mostly just mini-bosses and easy-to-defeat enemies with a few difficult enemy rooms. But if you come in with full hearts and a red potion, it really isn't too bad, despite how big it is. The dungeon still looks like more of the same, and it doesn't really have puzzles, and even if I don't like the song used, I'm glad it's at least different. I just hate they used the exact same color as the dungeon right before it, like it's just an extension of level 8. I mean, every dungeon just kind of feels that way, like level 4 is just the DLC to level 3. This is especially true later on. I also really hate how fucking random the whistle is. Basically, it's a nice little way to travel fast. It takes you to the entrance of a dungeon you've already completed. Given the dungeons are all spread out, this is very useful to move around Hyrule very fast. You just really don't get to select where you want to go. You kind of have to use it multiple times until you eventually end up where you want. It just seems kind of unnecessary. I honestly don't know why they didn't use this in dungeons more. I understand that it's used to defeat one boss, but it really seems like a warping whistle should be able to warp you back to the beginning of the dungeon. Especially since if you want to get back there quickly, you either have to walk all the way back or you need to die, which is going to lower your hearts down to 3. This game would be a lot more polished if it just added a few minor things. First off, a menu of where you want to warp. If it doesn't show it on the map, just at least a bar similar to an RPG that shows you all 8 levels so you can select where you want to go after playing the whistle, and so you can travel faster to where you need to. As I mentioned before, traveling or back through dungeons would be a lot more effective if you could just warp to the entrance with the flute, whether you need to start heading the other way, leave, or something of the sort. An example would be getting to Grumble Grumble level 7. You'd still have to come back this way, yeah, but at least you'd be able to warp out easily without having to waste time getting lost or taking more hits on your way out. Or, if you have to return after forgetting an item, you could just warp back easily. It's minute, but I could have easily used this a few times in my playthrough. I also feel like when enemies are cleared, they should stay cleared until you power off the game or reset it or something like that. It just seems a little ridiculous, and I know it's not asking too much. Some rooms in the game do this already, so why can't you just do it for every room? It's really stressful, and honestly, poor game design to make a player repeat so much. I can understand more if it's the player's result of failure, but the game punishes you so harshly for dying. All the enemies respawn and you only have 3 hearts with no potion. This could easily be solved by not only removing the respawn of enemies, but allowing the potion to return after death. Make it a permanent item. I mean, instead of having to leave and backtrack to go all the way back and defeat the same enemies over and over again until you die at the exact same spot, it just makes sense. It rewards the player for finding the secret bottle to begin with, and when you die, you come back with 3 hearts. The red potion is used to bring you back to full health, and now that the rooms are cleared, you can not only pick up to where you were, but also have 1 more potion left to last until the end of the dungeon, or until you die again. The old woman locations could still even be useful if you've used your potion but didn't die after the second use. You could refill it before moving on. This seems to be a more fair and valid, and still holds challenge to the overall game without being overly crucial. That's just how I felt a majority of my problems would have easily been solved though. I know The Legend of Zelda is a high-tech NES game already, but I don't think these additions would have been impossible and aren't really asking too much. What do you guys think? I do want to say for the record that this run, despite my hardships, only took me like 4 or 5 hours. It wasn't long. I obviously have played this game before and knew what to do and where everything was. I am, however, establishing how dated this game is and how it doesn't hold up too well. I'm more so explaining things from either my first time playing or someone who would be playing this for their first time. Or even if they don't know Zelda or just want to start from game 1. I can understand the thought process and the sheer outdated game style and approach that Zelda 1 has, and why someone today would be unlikely to enjoy or pick up the game at all. Especially taking note through this game on an analytical, critical level, this time going through it, I had to take note of these things because if someone asked me, how did you figure that out? I could only give the answers of, I don't know, or everybody just knows it at this point. Which honestly, even though a lot of it would be cryptic or frustrating, it kinda ruins the highlight of this game. Easily the best part of this game is exploration. I've made that clear, and I absolutely hate playing through dungeons in this game, and that I had a lot of fun exploring, and that the charm of the original Zelda is just that. It's become a lot less fun with age. Every secret, after almost 35 years, had just become common knowledge. Everybody knows where everything is at, and as a result, coming across something feels not only less exciting, but even less rewarding. Like, the effort you put in wasn't really yours. I hear people who played this game when it came out talk about how the most exciting part was being able to tell how you found a secret that you didn't know existed, and then share it with your friends at school the next day so they could check it out. Or even drawing out the Zelda 1 map and making note of every little secret they could find. I honestly can picture that. And it's a very warm feeling for sure, but sadly, even me playing the game at 11 years old in 2012 just sort of knew a majority of it just because it really was common knowledge. I'd really like to see someone who doesn't know anything about this game really sit down and play it just to see how they would react, play, and feel about it. And you know what? Maybe we'll do that someday. But for now, I'm hoping that by the time we reach Breath of the Wild, it captures all of these feelings, memories, and of course, the satisfaction of the original Legend of Zelda. Hey everyone, my name is Shine Sprite Ditto, and this has been a fun review to do, and this is a little bit of an after message after the review is done for the original Legend of Zelda. I've completed the game, and I already have everything ready to go, and everything is already pushed out, and it's about to be uploaded, but I wanted to add this little message. This was stuff during the research process of putting everything together that just really caught my attention, or things that I missed during the actual production of the video. And this is kind of like a post-production message to you guys. I want to start off by saying that there is a Switch version of The Legend of Zelda. If you have Nintendo Online, you probably know what I'm talking about. You can play NES games for free if you have an online membership. Of course, what other NES game would you want to play on there other than The Legend of Zelda? Of course, there's a second version as well. I didn't play this for quite some time because I thought that the special version would just make it so you instantly start the second quest. And while there's a way to do that in the original Legend of Zelda that I didn't cover here, by simply putting your name as Zelda, you will start the second quest first. I'm going to cover the second quest at another time, which is why I haven't really talked about it in this review, because I'm going to talk about it when I actually go to recover that game. But that is not the case. If you play the special version of The Legend of Zelda, you start off with far more hearts. It's kind of like a New Game Plus. You already have several heart containers, and every single item that you could possibly have, including the meat, before the first dungeon. Assuming that you'd have all the rupees and all kinds of secrets uncovered, you start off with max rupees. So you can have every item already except the dungeon items. Now, I want to say that in terms of puzzle solving, this really helps make the game easier. You start off with a lot more hearts to get you started in combat. That helps you get more hearts in the dungeons, the better that you do there. And also, with just figuring shit out. Like, you start off with the meat, so you realize that if you haven't used that item yet, a good place would be to do it in Dungeon 7. You don't have to leave Dungeon 7 if you haven't picked up the meat yet. It kind of solves a little bit of my issues with The Legend of Zelda, but the thing is that it doesn't make it so that you still have the same amount of exploration. It kind of just gives you what you're supposed to be exploring for, which I feel kind of takes away from the process. In terms of making the game more playable and more up-to-date, it works, but it still doesn't capture what I complimented about the game to begin with. So it's kind of like, if you want to play it, I recommend doing that just so you can get through the game and have an easier time, but I still don't recommend playing through this game unless you are already a Zelda fan. Likewise, a lot of my nitpicks with this game, with not knowing what to do, no sense of direction, just stuff not being useful. I know what so many people are going to say, that if you look inside the instruction manual that came with the game, so much of it is stated. Whether it be the puzzle involving the meat, the dungeon locations are literally told in the instruction manual, and everything else. I saw a lot of that when I was researching, and I know people are going to comment about that, saying this sort of stuff to me. And just tips and tricks on how to uncover secrets and stuff you can do that makes the game less cryptic. That I understand. I know that those things are the instruction manual, and I knew that, and I even brought it up a couple times in the video, but to make my point clear, what I am saying here is just simply that I wanted to look back at this game 34 years later to the date and see if the game would hold up. The fact that you would need an instruction manual from 1987 to be able to play this game in today's world without it being so difficult, that shows that the game has not aged well, because it doesn't stand alone unless you have written out words telling you how to play the game efficiently. And that's what the problem is. It's not that the game came with an instruction manual 34 years ago, it's that nobody has the instruction manual, and a complete version of The Legend of Zelda is hard to come by, thus making the game kind of unbearable to play in 2020. This was just a little after message I wanted to include for those of you who were saying that, but I really hope you guys enjoyed this review. I put a lot of work into it, and I'm just gonna let myself take the stage and go ahead and say what he wants to say. Thank you guys. The Legend of Zelda, to say the least, is very outdated. It's difficult to play in 2020, and I only ever recommend playing it if you're a Zelda fan. However, there is a game by the name of The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. I recommend you play that game. The best way I could describe it is a redefined Zelda 1. It keeps a lot of the same concepts and ideals the original Legend of Zelda did, but I believe it highlights them greater without the frustration and the crypticness, and it plays a lot smoother and is quite the journey. It's one of my favorite Legend of Zelda games for that reason. It's able to capture the same feeling while fixing what was wrong with the original game and adding on to it. However, The Legend of Zelda is going to get 65 out of 120 Shine Sprites. The game is just difficult to play, and I only ever recommend playing it if you're a Zelda fan, and even then, if you just want to know what the game is like, when clearly a better version of the game exists, and A Link to the Past. I'll be tackling Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link very soon, actually, but 34 years later, The Legend of Zelda just doesn't hold up too well. But I do have to say, if you are a Zelda fan, I recommend you check out my Let's Play of The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. It's going quite well, even though it had a bit of a rocky start, but I can say that I'm starting to get quite proud of it now, and I think we're all going to have fun there. Likewise, this review took a lot of time, a lot more time than I expected. I learned a lot from it with editing and how to put together a review like this, and it was frustrating, but it was fun, and I think it came out pretty well. I hope that I was able to get my opinions across well, even though this is an excruciatingly long video. I just think it went really well, so if you could support me in this video, it would mean so much, especially if you're a Zelda fan. I have all kinds of Zelda stuff that's going to be coming to the channel, and it's just going to be a lot of fun. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you in the next episode of Shine Games. This is far from our last episode. As a result, I hope this little experiment turned out well, because it's a series I'm going to be quite fond of.